For 15 years, Colonel Douglas Sinclair had been present in every room he was carried into and absent from every one of them. His body breathed, his heart kept time, his eyes opened each morning at the same hour they always had. 40 years of pre-dawn reveille too deep to die. But the man behind those eyes, the one who had led 300 rangers through the Korangal Valley, who had memorized every soldier's name under his care, who had once told his daughter that a good officer never lets a subordinate stand alone, that man, by the agreement of every specialist in 6 states, was gone. Before we go any further, do me a small favor. If this kind of story is why you come here, tap that like button, drop a comment telling me what city or state you're listening from, and hit subscribe if you haven't already. This is Quiet Badge's Stories, and I'm glad you're here. Now let's begin. Dr. Franklin Whitmore did not like the night shift's notes. He stood at the nursing station on the 4th floor of Hargrove Medical Center in San Antonio, reading the overnight chart with the expression of a man who had been told his dry cleaning was late. His white coat was pressed to a knife's edge. His reading glasses sat on the end of his nose as though they, too, had been hired to perform a function and were expected to do it without complaint. The gold letters on his badge read, Chief of Neurology, Traumatic Brain Injury Unit. Maeve Calloway did not read the overnight notes. She had written half of them. She had been on the floor since 5:40 that morning. By 7, she had turned 3 patients, documented a seizure protocol on bed 12, changed a feeding tube collar that the night aide had left kinked, and spoken quietly to a man named Gerald in bed 7, who sometimes called out for someone named Rosie at 4 in the morning and needed to be told. Gently, each time, where he was, her scrubs were the color of a clear October sky. A small pin sat above her name badge, a compass rose worn nearly smooth, the kind of thing that looked like a souvenir but wasn't. Her dark hair was pulled back at the neck, her hands were still. She was 38 years old. She had been a nurse at Hargrove for 7 years. Nobody had ever asked where she was before that. Room 412 was at the end of the corridor, past the family lounge and the alcove with the broken ice machine that facilities had been promising to fix since March. Maeve walked it at 7:15, same as she did every morning, chart in her left hand, light on her feet in a way that did not match the linoleum and the fluorescence and the early morning stillness of a hospital floor. Douglas Sinclair was in his chair by the window. The day staff positioned him there each morning because the light was good, and because his daughter had asked them to, years ago, in the careful voice of a woman who was running out of things she could ask for. He was 61. He had the frame of a man who had been built for hard use and had then been kept very still for a very long time. His hands rested in his lap. His eyes were open, tracking the light on the window glass with the patient, unhurried attention of someone waiting for something that may or may not arrive. The official diagnosis was prolonged disorders of consciousness following severe traumatic brain injury. IED detonation, Kunar Province, Afghanistan, November 2009. He had been flown to Landstuhl, then to Walter Reed, then to a rehabilitation facility in Richmond, then here. The consensus, consistent across 15 years of evaluations, was that Colonel Douglas Sinclair retained basic autonomic function and demonstrated occasional reflexive response to stimuli, but showed no evidence of purposeful communication or awareness of self or environment. Maeve pulled the rolling stool to his side and sat. She took his wrist to check his pulse. 62, steady. She looked at his face while she counted. His eyes did not move to her. They stayed on the window. Then she moved his collar aside to check the track tube at his neck, and she saw it. She had not seen it in the many hundreds of mornings before this one because his collar had always sat higher, or the light had been wrong, or she simply had not been looking for it. She was looking now. Behind his left ear, below the hairline, at the junction where the skull met the neck, a small raised scar, perhaps 3 centimeters, following the curve of the mastoid bone. Clean, deliberate. The kind of closure a military field surgeon makes when the objective is precision and the clock is running. Maeve's hand did not move, her face did not move. She had last seen that incision pattern in a photograph in a classified document at Fort Detrick in the spring of 2012. She set the chart back in the holder. She checked his temperature. She smoothed the collar back over the scar. She said quietly, to no one in particular, "Good morning, Colonel," the way she said it every morning, and she walked out of the room and down the hall to the supply closet at the end of the corridor, where she stood in the dark for 11 seconds, with her hand flat against the metal shelving, and breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth the way she had been taught to do when a situation required her to think before she moved. Then she went to find Dr. Whitmore. He was reviewing imaging in the conference room off the nursing station. Maeve knocked on the open door. Whitmore looked up. He did not greet her by name. He did not greet nurses by name unless there was a reason. "I need to speak with you about Colonel Sinclair in 412. Whitmore looked back at the imaging. His case is reviewed quarterly. The next review is in 6 weeks. "I understand that, doctor. I'd like to speak with you now." Something in her voice, not volume, not urgency, but the flat, carrying quality of it, like a frequency that bypasses the ear and registers somewhere older, made him set down his pen. Make it brief. She made it brief. She told him about the scar. She described its location, its dimensions, its surgical character. She told him that she believed it was consistent with a cranial implantation procedure developed under a joint DARPA and Army medical research program between 2007 and 2013. A program designed to place a subcortical neural interface in soldiers who sustained catastrophic TBI in the field. A program that was officially discontinued in 2014 and whose records were sealed. A program she had personal knowledge of. Whitmore looked at her for a long moment. His reading glasses were still on the end of his nose. Ms. Calloway. Yes. You are a floor nurse. Yes. You are describing a classified military research program that you claim personal knowledge of. Yes. And you believe this changes the clinical picture of a patient who has been evaluated by 12 neurologists over 15 years. I believe it may, doctor. I believe the interface, if it was implanted, would not appear on standard imaging because the substrate is non-ferromagnetic, and the signal operates outside the frequency ranges typically amplified in clinical MRI. I believe there is a protocol for communicating with patients who receive this implant, and I believe Colonel Sinclair may still be reachable through it. Whitmore set his pen down on the table with the careful precision of a man deciding how to respond to something he found professionally offensive. Calloway, I want you to hear me clearly. This patient's family has spent 15 years in various stages of grief and hope and grief again. I will not have a floor nurse walk into that room with a theory she read on the internet and raise their expectations. Do you understand me? I didn't read it on the internet, doctor. Then where did you read it? She looked at him. Her hands were at her sides. She looked the way she always looked, quiet, slight, the kind of person a room forgets when someone louder walks in. I wrote part of it, she said. Whitmore's jaw tightened. He stood. He was a tall man, and he used the height now in the way tall men sometimes do, as though elevation were an argument. You will return to your patients. You will not discuss this with the Sinclair family. You will not enter room 412 with any equipment outside standard nursing protocol. Is that clear? Maeve did not answer. She turned and walked back to the floor. Rachel Sinclair arrived at 8:15, the way she did every morning she wasn't working. She was 41. She had the same jaw as her father, the same stillness around the eyes. She carried a paper cup of coffee and a folded newspaper she never read. She brought it because her father had read the paper every morning of his life, and some habits are less about the person who holds them than about the person who remembers them. She stopped at the nursing station. Good morning, Maeve. Good morning, Rachel. He had a good night. Rachel nodded. She always nodded the same way to that sentence, not with relief, exactly. With the careful, practiced neutrality of someone who had long since stopped letting good nights mean too much. She went into room 412. Maeve watched through the glass. Rachel sat in the chair beside her father. She put her hand over his. She talked to him, the way she always did. About her daughter's soccer game, about the drive-in, about something she'd seen on the news. His eyes stayed on the window, his hand stayed still. Maeve watched for 2 minutes, then she went to her locker in the staff room. Inside, beneath a change of scrubs and a water bottle, and a small photograph of a mountain she had not climbed since 2013, there was a gray canvas pouch, sealed with a flat metal clasp. It had been at the bottom of that locker for 7 years. Before that, it had been in a storage unit in Bethesda. Before that, it had been signed out under her name in the final equipment inventory of a program that no longer officially existed. She stood at the locker for a moment. She looked at the pouch. Then she picked it up and walked back to the floor. Rachel looked up when Maeve came into the room. She registered the pouch in Maeve's hand with a slight tilt of her head but didn't ask. Rachel, Maeve said, and her voice was very quiet. I'd like to try something. I'd like to try it right now, with your permission, before I speak to anyone else, because I need to know first whether there's something to speak about. I am not going to promise you anything. I am not going to lie to you. And if I'm wrong, I'll tell you I'm wrong, and we won't discuss it again. Rachel looked at her for a long moment. She had spent 15 years learning to read the faces of people who came into this room. Doctors who were managing expectations, social workers who were offering resources, residents who were curious and didn't know how to hide it. She read Maeve's face now. What is that? She asked, nodding at the pouch. It's a neural communication interface reader. It decodes low-frequency signals from a subcortical implant. Rachel, I believe your father may have a device behind his left ear that nobody here has ever tested for, because nobody here would have known to look for it. A surgeon placed it in the field in 2009, a part of a classified program designed to keep neural pathways active in soldiers with catastrophic TBI. Rachel's hand had tightened on her father's hand without her appearing to notice. You're saying he might be, she stopped. I'm saying the signal might still be there. I'm saying I won't know until I look. Do I have your permission? The room was quiet except for the soft sound of the ventilator down the hall and the distant murmur of the nurse's station. Rachel looked at her father. She looked at the window where the morning light was coming in flat and gold and steady. She looked at Maeve. Yes, she said, you have my permission. Maeve unsealed the pouch. Inside was a device no larger than a paperback book, a flat matte gray reader with a coiled sensor lead and a small screen the size of a playing card, capable of displaying 4 characters at a time. Beside it, a thin adhesive sensor pad, circular, 2 centimeters across. Old equipment. Precise equipment. The kind of thing that did not exist in any civilian medical catalog. Rachel watched without speaking. She kept her hand on her father's hand. Maeve placed the sensor pad gently behind Colonel Sinclair's left ear, over the scar, and pressed it flat. She connected the lead to the reader. She turned the reader on. The screen was dark for 4 seconds. Then it began to show static. Small flickering characters, meaningless, the baseline noise of 15 years of dormancy. Maeve adjusted the frequency with a small dial on the side of the device. She had done this 200 times in a basement room at Fort Detrick. She had done it once in a tent in Kandahar in 2011, in the dark, with her hands shaking from cold and something that was not cold. She did it now with complete stillness. Colonel Sinclair, she said, her voice very level, my name is Maeve Calloway. I'm going to ask you to do something very simple. If you can hear me, just the word yes, think it as clearly as you can. The screen flickered, noise, noise, noise. Then, ES. 4 characters, 1 word, 15 years of silence broken in a single breath. Rachel made a sound Maeve would not be able to describe later, not in any report, not in any journal entry. It was the sound of something that had been held for a very long time being set down. Maeve's throat closed for half a second. She kept her eyes on the screen. Colonel, she said, do you know where you are? The screen flickered, it began then restarted, HOSPITAL. Rachel's free hand went to her mouth. Do you know who is beside you? The screen was still for 3 seconds, then... RACH. Rachel pressed her father's hand to her face and held it there. She did not make another sound. She just held his hand against her cheek, and her shoulders moved once, twice, and then she was still. Douglas Sinclair's eyes, for the first time in 15 years, moved away from the window. They moved to his daughter's face. The glass door to room 412 opened. Whitmore stood in the doorway. Behind him stood the charge nurse, who had apparently been called. Calloway, his voice was thin, what is that device? What did you just do? Maeve stood. She did not turn around immediately. She placed her hand on Rachel's shoulder for exactly 2 seconds. Then she turned. Doctor, she said, I need you to come in and look at this screen. I am not. Whitmore stopped. He was looking at Douglas Sinclair's face, at the eyes which were now tracking his daughter, which were moving with the slow, deliberate precision of a man who had not been permitted to look at something for a very long time and was not going to waste the chance now. Whitmore walked into the room. He stood at the foot of the bed. He looked at the screen in Maeve's hand, which still showed RACH in 4 clear characters. His face did the thing faces do when the floor beneath a belief gives way suddenly and without warning. What is, he said, and then stopped. Dr. Maeve said, I need you to order a full neural imaging series with the non-standard frequency bands listed in Appendix C of the 2016 DARPA TBI program declassification packet. I need a speech pathology consult, and I need a communication specialist familiar with AAC devices, today. Whitmore looked at her. He looked at the screen. He looked at Douglas Sinclair, whose eyes were now closed, because 15 years of silence had just ended, and that is, apparently, exhausting. He looked back at Maeve. Who are you? He said. And not the way people say it when they mean what is your title. The way they say it when they mean I have been standing in the same room as you for months, and I did not know there was a room behind the room. Maeve set the reader on the rolling tray. She looked at him steadily. I'm the day shift nurse, doctor. She paused. Now please go order the imaging. By 10 that morning, Hargrove Medical Center was moving with the particular focused energy of an institution that has discovered something it cannot explain and must immediately explain. The imaging suite on level 3 had been cleared. A speech pathology consultant named Dr. Vera Huang had been pulled from an outpatient clinic. 2 residents were standing in the hallway outside room 412, doing the thing residents do when something significant is happening behind a closed door, which is stand in the hallway. Maeve sat at the nursing station and wrote in pencil on a yellow legal pad. Not in the electronic record, not yet. The shorthand of a person who had once written reports that other people were not permitted to read. She wrote, neural reader signal confirmed, responsive to direct address, semantic content present, Scar confirmed posterior left mastoid, consistent with field implantation, Kunar 2009 timeline. Reader frequency matched at 4.2 Hz offset, signal strength, moderate, 15 years of disuse, some degradation expected. Interface intact. She underlined the word intact. Rachel came out of the room and walked to the nursing station. Her eyes were swollen, her hands had stopped shaking. "He knew my name," she said. "Yes. He's been in there the whole time." Maeve was quiet for a moment. "I don't know what his experience has been. I don't think anyone can know that yet. But the signal is there, Rachel. The pathway is there. What we do with it from here is going to take time and a lot of people smarter than me about some things. But yes, he's there." Rachel put both hands flat on the counter. She looked at them. "I have a brother," she said. "Colin. He's in Denver. He stopped coming 3 years ago because the doctors told him." She stopped. She shook her head. "I need to call him." "Go call him," Maeve said. "I'll be here." At 11, a man named Richard Vane arrived on the 4th floor. He wore a dark suit and carried nothing. He had the particular posture of a person whose authority arrives before he does. He found Maeve at the nursing station and introduced himself as a representative of the Department of Defense, Office of Defense Research and Engineering. He said it pleasantly. He sat down in the chair across from her and placed a single sheet of paper on the counter between them and slid it toward her. It was a cease and care order. Her name was on it. "Miss Calloway," he said. Maeve looked at the paper. She did not touch it. "The device you used this morning was removed from a Department of Defense facility under ambiguous circumstances in 2014. The protocol you applied is covered under a non-disclosure agreement you signed as a condition of program participation. The patient in room 412 is a former military officer whose case falls under a joint VA-DoD care coordination framework that does not include independent clinical intervention by non-nursing personnel," Maeve said. Vane paused. "The program was declassified in 2016, she said. "I have the Federal Register citation. The device was signed out under my name in the final inventory, legally, before closure. The protocol I applied is described in the public record. I have violated no laws, broken no agreements, and I used equipment I own to provide care to a patient who gave informed consent through his legal medical proxy, who is his daughter, who was present." She looked at Vane. "Is there anything else you'd like to add to your order, before I have the hospital's legal counsel look at it?" Vane was quiet for a long moment. The door to the stairwell at the end of the corridor opened. Whitmore walked in, followed by Dr. Susan Alcott, the hospital's chief medical officer, a small woman in a dark blazer who moved through a room the way water moves around an obstacle, efficiently and without unnecessary comment. Behind her, a man Maeve did not recognize, older, in a suit that sat the way suits sit on people who spent most of their careers not wearing them. Alcott looked at the sheet of paper on the counter. She did not pick it up. "Mr. Vane," she's Susan Alcott. "I'm the CMO here. Before we continue, I'd like to inform you that in the last 2 hours I've spoken with the legal counsel of 2 veterans advocacy organizations, the Office of Senator Patricia Kwan, who serves on the Armed Services Committee, and the head of Hargrove's Ethics Review Board. We are prepared to defend Nurse Calloway's actions and her device in any venue your department would like to choose. We are also prepared to make public the timeline of this patient's care, the existence of the sealed program, and the 11-year gap between program closure and today's intervention, should your department choose to pursue this." She paused. "Would you like to continue?" Vane looked at the older man behind Alcott. The older man looked back at him and shook his head once. Vane picked up the paper. He folded it. He stood. He looked at Maeve for a moment. His expression was not hostile. It was something more complicated, the expression of a person who has been told to hold a position and has just been shown that the position was indefensible before he arrived. "Lieutenant Calloway," he said, using her rank for the first time, "the department will be in touch." He left. Alcott sat down in the chair he had vacated. She placed her hands flat on her knees. "How many others?" she asked. Maeve had been waiting for that question. 41 received the implant in the field between 2007 and 2013. 19 were confirmed deceased as of 2014. Of the remaining 22, I have information on 17. I don't know the current status of any of them. Alcott looked at Whitmore. Whitmore was standing at the edge of the nursing station, and whatever he was not what he had been at 7 that morning. "I want a task force," Alcott said. "I want it operational by end of week. Calloway, you'll lead the clinical piece. Frank, you'll be the physician of record. We'll bring in VA liaison, ethics board, legal, communications." She looked at Maeve. "What do you need first?" Maeve picked up her yellow legal pad. "I need the DoD to release the original outcome files from the program. I need a neural communication specialist. There's a woman named Dr. Jana Ferraro who was on the original research team and is now in private practice in Austin. I need 2 nurses who can learn the reader protocol. I need a speech pathologist with AAC experience. And I need someone to find the 17 names on my list before I call their families and find out they're gone. Alcott nodded once. What else? I need Colonel Sinclair to be able to talk to his daughter. Everything else waits for that. By 1 p.m, the neural imaging was done. Dr. Huang sat across from Maeve in the staff lounge and put her tablet on the table between them. The interface is visible on the extended frequency scan, Huang said. It runs parallel to the left temporal lobe. I've been reading brain imaging for 22 years and I have never seen anything like it. She paused. How long has he been here? 7 years since I started. He was transferred from a facility in Richmond before that. I reviewed 6 years of imaging from this facility. The device is in every scan. Nobody amplified for the right frequency range. Nobody would have known to. No, Maeve said. They wouldn't have. Huang was quiet. She looked at the tablet. She looked at Maeve. Her hand on the tablet was not quite steady. Does he understand what's happening? She asked. Does he know? Maeve thought about the way Douglas Sinclair's eyes had moved to his daughter's face. The particular quality of that movement. Patient, like someone who had been watching a door and had not stopped watching it. I think so, she said. Yes, I think he's known for a while. Huang closed her eyes briefly. Opened them. She stood, picked up her tablet, and walked out of the lounge with the careful, deliberate steps of a person who needs a few minutes alone with something large. Jonna Ferraro arrived the next morning. She came in a rental car from Austin with a hard-sided case in the trunk and the expression of someone who had not slept. Not because she hadn't tried, but because there are some phone calls that make sleep beside the point. She walked into Maeve's temporary office on the 3rd floor, and they looked at each other across a desk that was not yet Maeve's desk and did not speak for a moment. Wraith, Jana said. Using the call sign the research team had given Maeve in 2011, because she had a way of being in a room that people only noticed after she'd already done whatever needed doing. Doc, Maeve said. They didn't embrace. They were not people who embraced easily. Jana set the case on the desk and opened it, and they started working. By the end of that week, they had reached 4 of the 17 names. A man named Arthur Pell in Flagstaff, Arizona, retired Marine Corps sergeant, 13 years in a minimally conscious state at a family care facility. His wife Greta answered the phone. A man named Robert Dunn in Louisville, Kentucky, former Army medic, 10 years in a long-term care unit. His son answered. A woman named Christine Okoro in Savannah, Georgia, the only woman on the list, former Air Force parasescue jumper, 11 years in a rehabilitation center. Her sister answered and then immediately began to cry, and Maeve held the phone and waited. A man named Pete Swanson in Billings, Montana, former Navy corpsman, 8 years at home in his family's modified ranch house. His husband answered, and before Maeve had finished her 3rd sentence said, quietly, his eyes have been moving differently for the past year. I thought I was imagining it. You weren't, Maeve told him. Each call was different, and each call was the same. The particular quality of a voice that has been holding a door cracked open for years and has just been told it is allowed to open it fully. Not all of the 17 could be reached in time. 2 had died in the years since the program closed, causes unrelated to their injuries. 1 could not be located despite the search. 2 others were assessed by Jana on site and found to have interface degradation too severe for reliable communication. The tissue around the implant having changed in ways that 15 years of dormancy had made irreversible. Maeve met with both families. She told them the truth, all of it, without softening the parts that were hard. Both families thanked her anyway. One of them, the family of a Marine named Specialist Freddie Alcala, gave her a photograph of Freddie taken at his wedding in 2007, 2 years before deployment. She kept it in the drawer with the yellow legal pad. Douglas Sinclair's rehabilitation was slow, and then it was not slow, and then it was something that did not have a clear word for what it was. His motor function, untouched by his original injury, returned with practice. His voice came back in stages, first breath control, then consonants, then vowels, then words, halting and rough and extraordinary. The first word he spoke aloud, not through the reader, but with his own voice in the small bright room on the 4th floor, was Rachel. She was sitting beside him. She heard him say it, and she looked at him, and then she put her head down on the edge of the bed and laughed. Not the way people laugh when something is funny. The way they laugh when the alternative would be something they cannot do in a room with other people. Colin had arrived from Denver 2 days after Maeve's call. He stood in the corner of the room when his father said Rachel's name and pressed the back of his hand to his mouth and stood very still. Rachel lifted her head. She wiped her face. She said, "That's right, Dad, it's me, I'm here." And Douglas Sinclair said, very slowly, very carefully, with the particular effort of a man lifting something heavy and precious and long set down, "I know, I've always," he stopped. "Breath, I've always known." Rachel took his hand. She held it. "I know," she said. 3 months after the morning, Maeve Calloway noticed a scar behind a patient's ear. Hargrove Medical Center held a gathering in the conference center on the second floor. Not a press event. Those had already happened, in the weeks after the San Antonio Gazette ran the first story, and it moved nationally. This was quieter. The people in the room were the ones who had been in it from the beginning. 12 veterans and their families, Jana Ferraro, Dr. Vera Huang Whitmore, standing near the back with his hands behind him, Alcott. The physical therapists and speech pathologists who had done the daily work, Colin and Rachel Sinclair, who sat on either side of their father. Douglas Sinclair stood with a cane. He had been using it for 3 weeks. He moved slowly and with intention, the way a man moves when he has relearned a thing he once knew and is not going to take it for granted. He had asked to say something. Alcott had given him the floor. He walked to the front of the room. He did not use a microphone. He had commanded men in the Korangal Valley without one, and the habit was in his chest. I was told, he said, by 12 doctors over 15 years that I was not there. He paused. I was there. He looked at the room. I would like you to understand what that means, not as a complaint, as information. I was there. I heard every conversation in that room. I felt every hand on my shoulder. I know the names of every nurse who talked to me on the night shift when they thought I couldn't hear. I know which residents were kind and which ones were running down a checklist. He stopped. He looked at his hands on the cane. I spent 15 years watching a window and waiting for someone to look at me and see something besides a problem that had already been solved. Then a woman in blue scrubs walked in one morning and looked at a scar, and everything that had been waiting started moving again. He raised his head. Maeve, he said, I would like you to come up here. Maeve was standing at the side of the room. She had not been told this part was coming. She walked to the front, her footsteps quiet on the carpet, her scrubs the same vivid blue they were every morning. Douglas Sinclair let go of the cane with his right hand. He brought it up to his temple, a military salute, slow and deliberate, from a man for whom the gesture meant something specific and earned. Behind him, Pete Swanson rose from his chair. He was on 2 canes and he used both of them. He brought his right hand up. Christine Okoro stood. Arthur Pell stood. Robert Dunn stood, his son steadying him by the elbow. One by one, the veterans in the room rose to their feet and brought their right hands to their temples. Jana Ferraro stood. She was not military, but she had spent 3 years in that program and she knew what this meant. Her hand came up. Whitmore, at the back of the room, raised his right hand in the imprecise, earnest way of a man who has never served and knows it and means it anyway. Maeve's throat closed. Her chin stayed level. Her eyes stayed steady. She raised her right hand, the one with the compass rose pin above her name badge, the one that had pressed the sensor pad to a scar on a Tuesday morning in November, and she returned the salute. She held it. They held it. Then she dropped her hand, and the room began to applaud, and it went on for a long time, and she stood in it without moving until Douglas Sinclair stepped forward and said, quietly, so only she could hear, "They offered to reinstate you, full rank, the program directorship." "Yes, sir. They did." "You said no." "Yes, sir. I left for a reason. I came here for a reason. These people deserve to be seen by someone who chose to stay inside a system that could reach them, not one that once told her to look away." She touched the compass rose pin. "I'll keep my scrubs." The colonel looked at her for a long moment. He nodded once. Then he turned to his children, and Rachel took his arm, and Colin took his other arm, and the 3 of them stood together near the front of the room, and for a moment the light through the conference center windows was very bright and very ordinary, and very good. Whitmore appeared at Maeve's elbow with 2 cups of coffee from the side table. He handed her one without speaking. She took it. He looked at the room. After a moment he said, "There are 5 names left on the list." "I know, Doctor. I want to find them." "So do I." He nodded. He did not say anything else. He looked at his coffee cup. He looked at Maeve. He looked at Douglas Sinclair standing between his children in the light. Then he said quietly, "I owe you an apology for that first morning." Maeve looked at him. Her green eyes were level. "Yes, Doctor, you do." She took a sip of the coffee. It was the right temperature. "Now let's go find the 5. She set the cup down. She picked up the yellow legal pad from the table beside her. She turned to a fresh page. She wrote 5 at the top and underlined it. She walked out of the conference room and down the corridor toward the elevator. The fluorescents hummed above her the same as always. The linoleum reflected the morning light in long pale stripes. Hargrove Medical Center on a Thursday in February. Ordinary and not ordinary, busy in the way hospitals are always busy. She stepped off the elevator on the 4th floor. She walked past the nursing station. She walked past room 412, which had a new patient now. An older woman, veteran. A family gathered around her in the careful way families gather, and she paused at the glass. Inside, a daughter was holding her mother's hand. The mother's eyes were open. They were looking at the window. Maeve looked at the window. She looked at the mother's face. She looked at the base of the woman's neck, where the collar of the hospital gown sat. She breathed in through her nose. She pushed the door open. "Good morning," she said. "I'm Maeve Calloway. I'll be your nurse today."